You found the house, the neighborhood looks clean, the landscaping is perfect, the amenities look great in the listing photos, and the price is actually within your budget. You're already mentally moving in. And then the HOA documents show up, a thick packet of legal language that most buyers flip through, sign, and hand back within 48 hours because they think it's just standard paperwork. And that right there is the moment most homeowners create a problem they won't fully understand until they're already locked in. Hit subscribe before we dive in, because this one could save you thousands of dollars and a whole lot of headaches. I'm Jerry Davis, and I've been in and around real estate, construction, and property management long enough to know that the HOA document stack is where deals that look perfect on the surface start to unravel. I've talked to homeowners who bought beautiful homes in well-kept communities and ended up in legal disputes, hit with bills they never expected, or stuck unable to rent, renovate, or even repaint without board approval. And almost every single time, the warning was sitting right there in the fine print. They just didn't know what they were looking at. So today, we're going through 8 specific warning signs that show up in HOA documents all the time. And I'm going to tell you exactly what to look for, why it matters, and what questions you should be asking before you ever put pen to paper. Let's start with the one that catches the most people off guard, and that's the special assessment clause. Every HOA has the ability to levy what's called a special assessment, basically an extra charge on top of your monthly dues that covers unexpected or large expenses the reserve fund can't handle. Okay, that's normal. Communities need roofs replaced, pools repaired, roads repaved. That happens. What you need to look at is whether that assessment is capped. Some HOA documents limit how much the board can assess per household per year without a homeowner vote. Something like a $1,500 cap, for example. That's a protection for you. But a lot of documents, and I mean a lot, have no cap written in at all. Or the cap is so high, it's functionally meaningless. I've seen special assessments hit homeowners for $8,000, $10,000, $12,000 because the parking structure needed emergency repair and the reserve fund was essentially empty. One bill, no warning, due within 60 days. You need to find that clause, read the cap number, and then compare it against the reserve fund balance, which we'll get to in a minute. Now let's talk about fines, and specifically the fine escalation policy. Most HOAs have the right to fine you for violations: parking in the wrong spot, leaving your trash bins out too long, having a garden hose visible from the street, whatever. And fine policies in general are not automatically a red flag. What you're looking for is whether fines compound or escalate automatically. Some documents allow fines to double weekly or accrue daily until the violation is resolved. And some allow the HOA to place a lien on your property if unpaid fines reach a certain threshold. That means your property can ultimately be foreclosed on over a fine situation that started at $50. I am not exaggerating. This has happened. Read the fine schedule, find out what the daily or weekly escalation rate is, and find out exactly at what dollar amount they can initiate lien proceedings. If that number is low, like a few $100s, and the escalation rate is aggressive, you need to think hard about whether you want to live under those rules. Here's what no one tells you about rental restriction clauses. A lot of buyers look at a house as both a home and a long-term investment. Maybe you plan to live there for 5 years and then rent it out when you move. Sounds reasonable. Except a growing number of HOAs have written rental restriction language into their CC and Rs. That's the covenants, conditions, and restrictions document that either prohibits rentals entirely, caps the number of units in the community that can be rented at any given time, or requires a waiting list before you can even apply to rent your own property. That last one is especially brutal. I've seen communities with waiting lists that stretch 2 or 3 years. You buy the house, you move away for a job, you go to rent the unit, and you find out you can't for another 24 months because the rental cap is already full. Your options then are to sell, carry the property empty, or violate the rules and face consequences. Read the rental restriction section word by word. If there's a cap, find out what the current rental occupancy rate is relative to that cap. If it's already near the limit, that flexibility you were counting on is effectively gone. This is where people mess up a lot. They look at the monthly HOA dues and think they understand the full financial picture. Low dues feel like a win. $200 a month sounds way better than $500, right? But dues alone tell you almost nothing. What you actually need to look at is the reserve fund study and the reserve fund balance. Most states require HOAs to conduct periodic reserve studies that estimate the cost of future repairs and replacements. The roof, the elevators, the pool equipment, the paving, all of it. And compare that to how much money is actually sitting in the reserve account. A well-funded HOA typically has a reserve balance that covers at least 70% of its projected needs. When you see a community sitting at 30% or lower, that's a serious warning sign. That gap has to get filled somehow. And the two ways it gets filled are by raising dues significantly or by levying a special assessment. So those low dues you're excited about, they might be low because the board has been kicking the can down the road for years and the bill is about to come due right after you move in. Ask for the most recent reserve study. If they can't produce one or won't share it, walk away. Let's talk about architectural control, because this one frustrates homeowners in ways they absolutely did not anticipate when they bought. Architectural control clauses give the HOA the authority to approve or deny changes you make to the exterior of your property, and sometimes even interior changes that affect the building's structure or appearance. That sounds reasonable when you picture it as preventing a neighbor from painting their house neon orange. But here's the problem. Depending on how the document is written, that clause can require board approval for replacing a front door, installing new windows, adding a patio, changing your landscaping, putting up a fence, or even changing your exterior light fixtures. And approval isn't guaranteed. Some boards are slow, some are inconsistent, and some have preferences that have nothing to do with community standards and everything to do with personal opinions. I've talked to homeowners who waited 4 months for approval to replace damaged siding with the same material in the same color. 4 months for a direct replacement. Look at what specifically requires approval. Look at the turnaround time the board is required to respond within, and look at whether they have written objective standards for approvals, or whether it's entirely at their discretion. Discretion without standards is a recipe for inconsistency and conflict. Now, let's talk about the amendment procedure. And I want you to pay close attention here because this one is subtle. Every HOA has a process for changing the rules, the CC and Rs, the bylaws, the rules and regulations. Some of that process is actually protective for you as a homeowner. Documents that require a supermajority vote of all homeowners, say 67% or 75%, to change major rules are hard to amend, which means stability. The rules you agreed to when you bought are likely to stay close to what they are. That's good. But some documents give the board broad authority to amend the rules and regulations section, which is different from the CC and Rs, without a homeowner vote at all. The rules and regulations section is where a lot of the day-to-day restrictions live. Parking rules, pet policies, move-in and move-out fees, hours for using shared amenities, short-term rental policies. If the board can change those unilaterally, the community you bought into today might operate under very different rules in 2 years, and you have no vote in that process. Look for where the amendment authority sits. If it's concentrated entirely in the board for the rules section, that's a flag worth noting. Here's a pro tip most buyers never think to ask about: litigation history. Before you buy into an HOA community, you want to know whether the association is currently involved in any lawsuits or has been recently. Active litigation is usually disclosed in the resale documents, but it's often buried in a section labeled something like pending legal matters near the back of the package. Why does this matter? Because litigation is expensive, and those legal fees come from the association's funds. If the HOA is currently being sued by a contractor for non-payment on a $500,000 repair job, or if a group of homeowners is suing the board over a policy dispute, that money has to come from somewhere. And if the reserve fund is already underfunded, going back to what we talked about earlier, you can see how quickly this becomes a financial spiral that lands directly on your doorstep in the form of a special assessment. Ask directly whether there are any pending or recent lawsuits. Check the meeting minutes if you can get them. Boards that have been in litigation usually reference it in meeting discussions, and those minutes can tell you a lot about how the community is actually functioning. The eighth warning sign is the one I see the least amount of attention paid to, and it might actually be the most important over the long haul. Look at how the management company is contracted and who has the authority to renew that contract. Many HOAs hire a professional property management company to handle day-to-day operations, collecting dues, managing vendors, enforcing rules, handling accounting. That's fine and very normal. What you're looking for is whether the management contract has a long term with automatic renewal built in, whether the board has the unilateral authority to renew it without homeowner input, and whether there are any financial relationships between board members and the management company or its vendors. I've seen situations where a management company contract auto-renews for 3 years at a time. The fees are substantially above market rate, and the board, which has authority over the renewal decision, has relationships with the management firm that homeowners don't know about. It doesn't always mean something improper is happening, but when a community is poorly managed, dues are high, services are bad, and vendor costs seem inflated, this is often where the explanation lives. Look at the management contract term, the renewal language, and the exit clause. If the HOA can't fire the management company without paying a large penalty, and the board can renew the contract independently, you have very little leverage as a homeowner to push for better management if things go sideways. Look, I get it. When you're buying a home you love, the last thing you want to do is spend a weekend reading HOA documents like a law student. But these 8 things, the special assessment cap, the fine escalation policy, the rental restrictions, the reserve fund health, the architectural control language, the amendment procedures, the litigation history, and the management contract structure. These are the areas where people get surprised after the fact. And by surprised, I mean financially hurt and legally trapped. None of this means you should automatically avoid HOA communities. Some of them are genuinely well-run, financially stable, and actually protect the value of your investment. But you need to go in with your eyes open, not just trust that the paperwork is standard because the agent handed it to you with a smile. Tell me in the comments which one of these you had no idea about, because I guarantee at least one of them is going to apply to a community you've considered. And if you're already in an HOA and any of this sounds familiar, drop that in the comments too. I genuinely like to know what people are dealing with out there. Here's the takeaway from all of this. Buying a home in an HOA community is not just buying a house. You're entering a financial and legal relationship with a governing body that has real authority over your property, your wallet, and sometimes your daily life. The dues are only part of the cost. The rules are only part of the commitment. Read the documents, ask the specific questions I've laid out today, and if anything looks unclear, spend a few $100s on a real estate attorney to review the package before you close. That is genuinely one of the best investments you can make in a real estate transaction. A good HOA protects your investment. A bad one drains it. And the difference between the two is almost always visible in the fine print before you ever sign. Hit like, subscribe, and share this with someone who's about to buy in an HOA community, because I promise you, they need to see it. I'll catch you in the next one.